The following is a conversation with Bert TerHart, an extraordinary individual whose life combines adventure, science, and environmental advocacy. Bert is an adventurer who sailed over 50,000 miles solo, completed a 7,800-kilometer paddling journey across Canada, and is pioneering innovative technologies with LeadBrain.ai. His story is about perseverance, leadership, and unwavering commitment to sustainability. This is Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast, and I'm your host, Sid Bansala. Let's explore how Bert's experiences can inspire and challenge us to rethink the boundaries of human potential and our role in protecting the planet. Let's get started. Bert, welcome to the show.
Hello, Sid. It's great to be here. And whenever I hear something like that introduction, I want to look over my shoulder and see who it is you're talking about. So that's thank you very much for that. That's very kind. And I'm really looking, I've been looking forward to speaking with you for quite some time. So I'm pretty excited.
Great. Bert, let's start at the beginning. Every great journey starts with an idea or a moment of inspiration. What first inspired you to take on the monumental challenge of solo circumnavigation?
Well, I think that, I can remember very specifically, I grew up on the prairies, which is about as far away from the ocean as you can get, from the Atlantic, Pacific, and the Arctic. So they're right in the middle of North America and, Canadian prairies. And that, the place where I grew up is just littered with Indigenous artifacts. So you could just, walk out on the prairie just in any sort of spring or fall when there's not a lot of, grass and growth covering, and look around and find something that's been there for 1,000 years, 2,000, 3,000 years. The oldest thing I have in the house is close to 5,000 years old. It's a spear point. So that and if you pick up one of these artifacts and then stop and think about what you have in your hand and how it got to be there and who made it, who last saw it, all these things, you can't help but be completely and utterly amazed at the people that have come before you in some way, shape, or form. I mean, Canada is a very tough place to live. It's cold, it's desolate, there's not a lot here. Certainly, my brother would say, growing up in the prairies, there's a lot to look at and not much to see. So, and that connection with the past had inspired me, certainly in a sailing sense, to follow in the footsteps of some of the world's greatest navigators and cartographers. I mean, Canada literally would not be the place it is. It literally would be a different place if it weren't for people like Cook and Bligh and Vancouver and La Perouse and Bodega de Quadra, Champlain, LaSalle. Of course, there's fantastic American explorers like Perry and the list, and European explorers. Of course, the list goes on and on and on. And I've always been drawn to that original experience of brushing the tips of my fingers across a spear point that's as sharp as a knife that's been lying on the ground for 150 years and might have been first made 2,000 years ago. So those peoples and their stories I've been chasing in one way or another. And I suppose I could, without getting too long-winded, it's one thing to walk a mile in someone's footsteps. It's something else to walk 4,000. So that's probably why.
Yeah. And how did your upbringing and early experiences shape your adventurous spirit?
Well, I think my parents are immigrants. Both my parents were Dutch. They came to Canada in the early 1950s with the typical immigrant story. They had virtually nothing. They were both very accomplished. My father was a very accomplished mariner, and my mom was a cosmopolitan. She worked in the Dutch embassy in Australia, Paris, London, obviously in Holland, Canada as well. So they came here with skills that they didn't necessarily. They leveraged what they had learned. But the Dutch embassy is a long way from a tent in northern Manitoba, and being a ship's captain is a long way from working as a surveyor in Uranium City in the Arctic. So, but they were able to leverage those skills. So that speaks to the fact that they were adventurers in their own right, and certainly explorers, because this is a place they'd never seen, never been to, was completely unknown to them. So I think I came to it. I've come to it naturally, and that sort of natural curiosity that my father had for everything that was around him, that my mother had for languages and people and societies and cultures. I think that again was part of my DNA, and uh, I guess I blame my dad. When I would start off, I say, Dad, I'm going to sail around the world. He would look at me a little. Well, I can tell you what he said. I said, Dad, I'm going to attempt a solo nonstop circumnavigation, and he said, I thought you were smarter than that. And then he just shook his head. So, and then I said, after he looked at me for a while, I said, well, it's your fault, right? Because anyway, so I think I come by it naturally. And my father sailed to school. Yeah. He rowed to school. And ever since I was a young boy, my dad had me in a boat, either sailing or paddling or rowing. So,
so he's the one who gave you the sailing virus.
Yeah, it's a virus.
Yeah, and there is no antidote.
Yeah, there's no antidote. There's pictures of me when I'm and I've got all my friends, and we're either trying to put a sail on a log, an inner tube, a canoe, a boat.
Trying to improvise, and
we're trying to sail anything. And of course, being kids, it's wildly unsuccessful, but that never stops you, right? So, and even with my own kids, I think I had my daughter in a crib that was lashed down to the salon in a 36-foot sailboat. And I mean, she couldn't go. So I think she was probably only, she would have only been, maybe 5 or 6 months old when I had her plunked in. And of course, there's lots of people who go sailing around the world with their kids, but
Was there a defining moment, Bert, when you realized this was the path you wanted to pursue?
I think I've always been drawn to it. Like as a child, I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to go to sea like my dad, and because I had a technical bent, I wanted to go to the ocean. And I've never strayed very far away from that. I mean, I was probably the only platoon commander in the Canadian Special Service Forces who was living on a boat. So, and my commanding officer, when you get posted someplace, you got to meet the commanding officer, and his first words were, "Why the insert long string of profanity in here that's suitable for the Army? Did they send me a guy living on a boat?" That was his first thing to me. So I had to anyway. So I've never strayed from that path. So I've always felt drawn to it, and the path, of course, life has to do is a little bit of this. So I've always finding my way back to the ocean in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and for the listeners, the ocean is vast, unpredictable, and humbling in the same time. It must have taught you more than just how to navigate. After 50,000 miles of solo sailing, what's the most valuable life lesson the sea has taught you?
Well, I think I didn't sail around the world. I snuck around the world. My hope was to sail around the world before Mother Nature found out I was actually in the Southern Ocean. And taught me a proper lesson. So, and people don't climb Everest; they sneak up on it. Yeah. So I'm glad you put humble in there, because I was, in order to be successful, firstly you have to be completely embedded in the moment. You can't be concerned. Well, obviously that's not correct. Of course you're concerned about the weather that's coming at you, but you can't be so embedded or so married to the forecast that you're ignoring what's happening on the other side of the hull. So in order to be successful, you have to be completely embedded in what's happening right now. And no matter how terrible and miserable and horrible it is. And sometimes the most terrible, miserable, horrible thing is being becalmed in the middle of the Southern Ocean. Because of course the wind goes away, but the sea state is chaotic. And without any wind to steady the boat, and to give you some sort of directional stability, the motion on the boat is terrible. So some of my worst experiences were becalmed, not necessarily in some storm. And the storms are everything that they're cracked up to be. But if you can be embedded in the moment, which means that you're making decisions that could be good or bad, all that means is all you need to be is engaged, then chances are that you're going to be successful. And that applies to anything in life. You simply cannot. I'm a firm believer in not being married to the outcome, but you have to be you need to be completely divorced from the outcome and married completely to the now.
The moment.
So, I mean, that seems a little counterintuitive, especially for entrepreneurs who are, goal driven and all these sorts of things. But the future is none of my business. I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm hoping that tomorrow is going to unfold something like, today is going to unfold, but that we have no guarantee of that whatsoever. Your life can change in a heartbeat for circumstances well beyond your control. So unless you're engaged in the process and engaged in the moment, looking towards the future can spell disaster. So think of it this way. If you had to sail around the world, it's a daunting task. It's 25,000 miles or so, maybe more from this coast, most of it through the Southern Ocean. Most of it you have no idea what's going to happen to you. You have no idea the boat that you have no guarantee whatsoever that the boat is going to stand up to it. But okay, so that's my goal. I'm going to sail around the world. Well, think of that. I mean, it's ridiculous. There's an absurd sort of cast to that sort of hubris. But if I can sail to the next point, if I can sail the next 10 miles, I can see across the bay 10 miles. Well, that's reasonable, right? I can be embedded in the moment and getting those 10 miles or those 6 miles, because that's as far as the horizon I can see, sort of 6 miles away. And if you keep doing that, you'll sail around the world as long as you're adaptable to whatever's coming at you. So I can't leave, Victoria Harbor and expect the conditions to be the same all the way around the world. I mean, I was shocked at how many times people would ask me that question. How was the weather? Did you ever run into any storms? It's like, how can you possibly not run into storms? I mean, Of course, these people aren't necessarily sailors, but the underlying premise is that things are primarily the same. And even my father had that same idea, because when he sailed around the world as a merchant mariner, he's sailing in the, he's not sailing in the Southern Ocean. He's sailing on the normal trade routes for commercial traffic, and the weather there is usually pretty good. That's why ships travel those. They tend to travel those routes. But nonstop circumnavigation is the only way to do it is through the Southern Ocean, and there's nobody there because the weather's horrible. So there will be storms. Yeah. So I think the biggest lesson that I learned was, firstly, you have to make a decision. Whether it's good or bad doesn't make any difference. You just have to be engaged in the moment, which means trying to do something that's going to move forward or move you forward. And if you're wrong, then you can still make another decision. You can get that right. So I look at it, I think of it this way. If you're faced with a decision, at a big quote, let me say something I like to say to sailors, or non-sailors, and any fool can put a sail up, but it takes a sailor to know when to take it down. So
I like that.
Yes. So as soon as you think of something and you take some action, so you think of something and then you do it. Let's say that you're right. You look like a genius because you're ahead of the curve. You're ahead of the boat. You're ahead of the market. You're ahead of everything. You're winning. You're a genius. But let's say that you're completely and utterly wrong. You look like a genius because you're ahead of the curve, because now you can do something else. You know something that's not going to work. Now it's time to do something else. So, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, as long as you're willing to reassess what you've done. You're gonna come out smelling like the proverbial rose. The worst thing you can do is nothing. Is sit there and go, I wonder what I should do. I wonder what I should do. I wonder what I should do. I should do nothing. And there's a tremendous amount of inertia that wants to keep you strapped down to your bunk, because in that moment you're safe, because doing anything entails some kind of risk. Anything, right? Because there's three outcomes. Things can be worse, better, or the same. So you have a 66% chance of things being, if you add up worse and the same, you only have that's 66%. You have a 33% chance of things getting better. So your mind just wants you to stop, but you have to fight against that inertia, that little voice inside your head that says, you're okay now, just keep doing this, you're fine.
Yeah. And how does being at sea change your perspective on control, patience, and adaptability?
Well, I mean, there's a really beautiful thing about being at sea. You get this, at least for me, so you get this experience that you're this tiny, tiny fleck, you're barely a bubble of foam on this vast, virtually infinite ocean, limitless horizon. The stars above you, of course, just speak of infinity and grandeur and splendor, and you're nothing, because you are nothing, right? If you were to fall off the boat, then the boat would disappear over the horizon and you'd never be seen again. And basically no one would know, not to be so morbid about it. But on the other side of that, you're the only one out there. All of this infinity, all of this beauty, all of this grandeur is just for you. It's like the whole universe has put on this gigantic, 3D IMAX experience that you could not get in any other way, just for you. So there's this complete contradiction. You're nobody, and yet all of this is just for you. And if you cannot be humbled by that experience, then I don't know what possibly can. So it's incredibly humbling to be in that situation, but it's an incredibly empowering and beautiful experience. And the trick to it all is knowing that I shouldn't say the trick. I think what I should say is the secret to it all is that you're not in control of anything. So as soon as you realize the things that you have control over, as soon as you let those things drive your life forward, the better off you'll be, and the chances of you succeeding increase wildly. So you are in control of first and foremost your mind. So being at sea, I guess most people don't like to go to sea because it's out of sight of land. So they'll say, I don't mind being on a boat, but I don't want to be out of sight of land. Well, why don't you want to be out of sight of land? That's because there's no more landmarks, and landmarks imply, directionality and not being lost. Like if you can identify a landmark, you know where you are. Mm-hmm. So this idea of getting lost, speaks viscerally to all of us. So people can go to sea for all, you can be afraid for all kinds of reasons. One, just being lost, and secondly, just because it's a wild environment, or thirdly, because it's hostile, because you can't breathe it and you can't walk on it. At least no one I know personally can do those sorts of things. So you will be afraid. That just comes with the territory. And that's true of anything. I mean, if you're afraid of failing, you should never start out life as an entrepreneur, because you will fail wildly in ways that you cannot yet even imagine. So you have to lean very hard into those failures. Think of any professional athlete. How hard does a professional athlete have to lean into failing in order for them to succeed? So I would say, and you'll have to forgive my language here. You can be scared witless, but you can never be scared shitless. So you can, and being scared, what I just said means that you're paralyzed. You can't do anything. And that then speaks to what I said before about taking some kind of action. Yeah. So I think, being at sea just taught me to do something. It reinforced, do something, anything. And, I'll say one thing about that lastly, is that as an officer leading soldiers, they actually don't care what the plan is. They only care that they've got something to do. The worst thing you can do to a bunch of soldiers is sit them down and tell them to do nothing. To do nothing, yeah. So the best thing you can do is tell them to do anything. And firstly, they have to eat. So, you can sit them down and tell them to do nothing as long as you can feed them. But they've got to do something. Yeah. It's like, serve anything. Just tell us, what to do. Yeah. And the worst thing you can do is go, geez, I don't know. Let's ask around, right? What do you guys want to do?
Bert, the ocean, it's full of surprises. It's full of issues. And for sure, it taught you problem solving. It's not sure it's guaranteed. So, how is your approach to problem solving in your entrepreneurship journey?
Well, I have the 4 Ps, basically. This is something that I drew from my experiences in the Army and then in academia as well. So it's plan. First, there's 4 Ps: plan, prepare, practice, persist. Plan, prepare, practice, persist. It's a positive feedback loop. So you plan to do something. You have to prepare. You got to, if you're going to paddle across the country, you've got to prepare. You got to get a canoe, right? You've got to figure out what to wear. You got to prepare for the journey. And then you got to practice, which means you got to get in the canoe and paddle. And then you need to persist because you're going to paddle for a very long period of time. And then when you come back, when you go plan, prepare, practice, persist, then you're back at plan. And if you're persisting in the plan that you had originally, and the plan is moving you forward, and even if it's in some very small way, then the plan is good, and persisting at direction is good. But if you're at the persistent stage and you're not going in the direction you want, that means that your original plan is somehow needs to be tweaked. Then you better tweak it, because persisting in that wrong direction now leads you on a divergent path. And instead of it being a positive feedback loop, it becomes a negative feedback loop. And it sounds incredibly trite and trivial, but it's unbelievably powerful. And it's scale invariant. It means that you can have the biggest plans in the world or the smallest plans in the world, and it still works. This has stood me really well in my entrepreneurial life as well. So it's the same 4 P's, same 4. And as long as you remain true to those 4 things in the way that speaks to you, because I can't tell you how you would prepare for something that might be unique to you, whether it's sailing or whether it's starting a business or whether it's scaling a business or whether it's getting a team together, because I know you've done extraordinary things. So that have to do with teamwork and getting teams together and putting on things at scale that really matter to literally hundreds of thousands of people. Then of course this idea of preparation is going to speak to you differently. But it's still the same principles. Like, these are foundational principles that you can apply in your own context, and they will absolutely work.
Yeah. Your work with LeadBrain.ai is interesting. It feels like a natural extension of your scientific background. Can you share the vision behind LeadBrain.ai and the challenges it addresses?
Well, I mentioned my dad. I mentioned growing up in a small town, in the middle of nowhere. And my dad was a small businessman, and I've always been just amazed at his work ethic, because it was really hard work. He was a land surveyor, and we lived in a part of the world where the economy was driven primarily by the oil business, so it's boom or bust. So I remember working with my dad. Christmases, New Year's, winter, summer, spring, and fall. I remember specifically with, trying to dig a hole in the frozen ground in permafrost with a pickaxe so that we could plant an iron pin that would say, this is where the corner is, this is where the pipeline is, is going to be or originate. And if my dad had not met his customers where they were, which is the oil business, that means if they want something done, they want it done now. And if you don't do it, someone else is going to do it, and they'll never call you again. Then I learned that number one, if you don't meet your customers where they are, then you don't have customers. You've got basically a fantasy. And I learned from my dad that every small business, most small businesses are concerned about their next client being their last, or indeed this client being their last. So with LeadBrain, although I've had other, much, much larger tech companies, that have focused on much, much bigger segments of the marketplace. LeadBrain is entirely focused on small local business. And the idea of LeadBrain is simply to get a particular business directly in the conversation of when their ideal customer is asking themselves, who do I buy from? And everybody asks that question online. That literally everyone goes online, does their Google search, they do this, they do that, and they ask the question online, where am I going to spend my money? And if your business is not placed directly in that conversation, directly in front of that customer, then you have an uphill struggle. And certainly for small businesses, this is a very steep climb indeed. And we can use technology. I mean, that's one of the great things about technology. It's one of the things about my background. You can answer that question, who do I buy from? If they're answering that question in technological context, you can answer it in a technological context. And that's what LeadBrain does. It sticks small business directly in front of those customers who are looking to spend their money on that particular product and service.
And how does this technology intersect with your mission of ocean conservation?
Well, I think that I have a bit of a platform given my adventuresome spirit, let's say. And I think that the fact that I'm willing to persist in some of these crazy sorts of things speaks to my customer base who are truly struggling to find customers and leads and get away from the grind of constantly trying to dredge up clients and customers.
Mm-hmm.
And they perceive that as a very difficult task, and I think that they would want someone who's has a proven ability to to stick to the mission. And my successes in business allows me to take big chunks of time off to do the things that I love to do, which gives me the platform then to speak to my ideal customers based on the things I think that resonate with them. I mean, because let's imagine that your ideal customer has an issue with solving a very persistent problem, and they've tried really hard to make it work and they can't. They typically would want someone who's displayed the ability to stick to a very difficult problem and solve it, because that's how they view their own problem. They view their own problem as something very difficult and difficult to address and solve. And the problems in science, and this speaks, so to get to do full circle with your question, the problems that I face as an oceanographer in science and that we face in terms of sustainability are very, very difficult problems, and they're persistent. They're not going away. Acidification of the ocean is not going away. Microplastics in the ocean not going away. We see soil degradation across all those places that are being industrially farmed. We see those problems not going away. So you need very persistent people, very focused on very specific problems to come to some kind of resolution. And I think this idea of persistence transcends entrepreneurship. It transcends being an explorer or an adventurer. It transcends being a sailor, because what I mean by transcendent, it speaks to every one of those particular. It speaks in every single one of those contexts and in a very loud and a sort of vocal way. And it also because I was trained as a scientist, although I haven't been one formal scientist for most of my adult life. Because I have a scientific background, I can speak that language, and then I can go away on these expeditions. They're completely self-funded, so I don't get money from the government. I don't get money from any corporation. I don't seek it, and I don't want it, because I don't want that to be an impediment to someone else doing the same sorts of things. So they're completely self-funded. So I use my own money and my own resources to go on to do these things. And whenever I'm away doing these things, I'm trying to engage scientists in a way that helps them. So this is my citizen scientist sort of bent, where because I tend to sail and travel to isolated places, scientists need data in isolated places, and I'm typically in the right place at the right time to help them, with whatever thorny problem that they're trying in a very persistent manner to address.
Mm-hmm. Bert, what excites you most about the potential impact of technology on sustainability?
Oh man, my parents are Dutch, so let me speak about that. Let me speak about technology and sustainability from a Dutch perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And most people can relate to the fact that almost all of Holland is underwater, or at least below sea level. So at one time it was underwater, it's not underwater now. So if it hadn't been for technology being able to pump out those fields, being able to manage the inflow and outflow of water, then Holland would be a vastly different place. And as it turns out now, the country is sustainable. I mean, it was able to sustain a population. It was able to sustain at one time a very dominant maritime presence across the whole world. So there isn't an aspect. I mean, look at the Mekong Delta in a similar way. Right now, there's 130 million people live below sea level in the Mekong Delta itself. So that's remarkable. Like that's 3 times the population of Canada, at least. That's living below sea level. If it wasn't for technology, that would be impossible. And going forward, AI has the ability to solve problems in those lines that we can't imagine. So, say for example, I talked about industrial farming. Most of industrial farming is made possible by fertilization and fertilizers, and right now there are farmers in Canada who are using very sophisticated GPS tracking to ensure that literally every 10 square meters of soil gets the correct amount of fertilizer, the correct amount of seeds, the number of seeds that are being planted. It's the correct amount of rest, as it were, because they're obviously planting different crops for different reasons at different times to rest the soil. And this is all based on being able to monitor the output of that 10-meter patch. So we used to do that with thousands of acres at a time. The First Nations people did that with thousands of acres. Iroquois First Nations people would plant corn over about 1,000 acres. And when that cornfield was no longer able to produce, they would just stack up or pack up and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But so we're able to do that now for, in 10 square meters versus 1,000, So so technology and AI is able to make, you can ask AI the question, you could ask that question today, and I'm sure it's being asked, what's a better fertilizer than nitrogen? And in the same way that AI is coming up with far better drugs, being able to understand how proteins are constructed in 3D, so that they're plugging into the receptors on a particular cell, because proteins plug into receptors like this, and anything like that doesn't work. And there's about 1 billion combinations of this and 1 billion combinations of that. So 1 billion times 1 billion is 10 to the 18th. This is a very big number. But you can ask AI the same question about fertilizer. What's a better fertilizer than nitrogen for this particular, if you're planting this in a particular field? And it would be able to produce something chemically that's maybe close to nitrogen, but not nitrogen, that's less harmful to the environment, that produces better crop yields. And if it weren't for better crop yields, we would be in serious trouble. Yeah. Most of the planet would be starving. So again, there's all kinds of ways to look at it. So there's a couple.
And Bert, on that, let me ask you a completely different question, which it keeps popping up all the time in some conversation I have with some guests. Regarding AI, how should we embrace AI going forward?
Oh, man. Well, firstly, we need to be very careful. Because like all things, it's a double-edged sword. There's two sides to every coin. So AI has this unbelievable future ahead of it to benefit us in ways that we can barely imagine. And it has the other side of that coin. I mentioned about these proteins that are plugging into cell receptors. So the people that were some of the first people, and this is open source code, by the way. So anybody can go and get this code and run it if you so chose. But the flip side of that is they were asking the questions, how can we improve cell function? And of course, AI was answering that question in a way that is going to impact the way that drugs are manufactured, produced, and distributed, because that costs hundreds of billions of dollars now. You can reduce that by at least 3 orders of magnitude.
Wow.
And they came back there one day and said, well, we're asking how can we improve cell function? How about if we just flip the switch, literally in programming language, that's going from a 0 to a 1. So you're optimizing towards 1 if you want cell function to improve. You want to optimize towards 0 if you want cell function to be destroyed. And AI came up with overnight tens of thousands of molecules that were more deadly and more toxic than anything that these guys had ever imagined before. So the first thing they did was go to the U.S. government and say, maybe this shouldn't be open source. So it's just a simple way of saying there's two sides to every coin. So you need to be very, very careful. And we've been swimming in a sea of AI, if you'll excuse the pun, for a very long time. It's hit the mainstream, and we've called it AI just because, it's got kind of a trendy name. We're used to thinking of AI as being very smart, but we've been, like every airplane that you've been on, certainly I've been on ever since I was an adult, was being flown on autopilot, which is AI. Yeah. We just never called it AI. We called it an autopilot.
Can we simplify it as machine learning?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Because I think machine learning is an entirely different thing. Machine learning is separate from large language models because large language models, I think, are able to intuit things that machine learning can't. So think of machine learning like the original autopilot.
Yeah.
It can't do any better than the guy who wrote the code.
The task,
than the task at hand. But AI is able to intuit things. And the next step, according to Sam Altman just a couple days ago, was saying that they're very close to AGI, which artificial general intelligence, which is what we're considered to have. We're considered to have this general intelligence that allows us to be placed into contexts that we don't necessarily have any familiarity with, but we can use what we know to intuit our way around our current surroundings and contexts than what we're doing. So I guess a way of saying is that if you, for example, if you know how to use a sextant at sea, for example, to navigate, you can be a land surveyor. It's two totally different things, right? But you can still use the skills that you've learned, to navigate at sea and what you know about a sextant to map all of North America. In fact, that's how all of North America was mapped, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And AI, as we know it now, is dependent on large language models for it to know anything. So it's still a little bit of, stupid in gets you stupid out. So it's still a little bit of that because AI is very good at hallucinating, for example. Like I use AI a lot to write code. So I'll think, okay, I want to write this code. I'll ask AI, I'll ask ChatGPT, this is my task, spit it out for me in this language. In the meantime, I'll have done the same thing and I'll compare the two and I can see where they're diverging. I can see where I've made a mistake. I can see where it's made a mistake. I can see where it's literally hallucinating. And that's one thing that's the large language model just sort of going off the reservation, if you'll excuse the expression.
Yeah.
So
fascinating. Let's see the next, let's say 2-3 years, where we're going to be.
Yeah.
In 12 months or maybe 12-15 months, we've seen, wow.
Yeah,
fantastic. But it's fascinating. Let's talk about leadership. Leadership in extreme conditions require a unique set of skills, and your background, and you spoke about it earlier, offers a wealth of insights here. How has your military training shaped your approach to leadership, Bert?
Well, I think the very first thing they teach you in the Army, if you're going to be leader, is how to follow. So the first thing you have to know is how to take orders. So you don't just get to give orders. You first have to learn how to take orders. And I think that's an incredibly valuable lesson to learn. Firstly, it's very humbling. Everyone is taking orders. There isn't anyone that you can imagine who isn't taking orders from somewhere, someplace, somehow. And if you can't take orders and you in no way, shape, or form are you fit to give orders, that just doesn't work. And anyone who's in a leadership position who's engaged in that sort of thing, that particular enterprise is going to fail spectacularly. And we've seen that from small business to countries, to entire civilizations, going, just being crushed under the weight of leadership. And my dad would say, if things are going wrong, you don't fire the janitor. So firstly, you have to be able to take orders. If you're an entrepreneur and you've decided to get venture capital, then, guess what? You're taking orders.
Yeah.
You may not like it, but you're taking orders. So you better learn you better get used to it.
Yeah.
And the other thing about, so once you understand that you're going to be, once you know how to take orders, that certainly goes a long way in helping you give orders. But because that's what leaders do. They make a decision and then everyone's on board with that. And if everyone is not on board with that, then you're not doing your job as a leader. I think you have to figure out a way to get everybody on board. And the only way to get everybody on board is to lead from the front.
Yeah.
You can't lead from behind. There's no such thing as a leader there's a difference, there's leaders on the field and then there's cheerleaders on the sidelines.
Yeah.
So if you want to be a leader and cheer, then by definition, you're going to be on the sidelines. You got to lead from the front.
Absolutely.
You have to be, as an entrepreneur, for example, you're the guy sticking out your neck. You're the guy writing checks for out of your own bank account if cash flow isn't what it's supposed to be. You're the guy who's got his house mortgaged, right? It's you, right?
Yeah.
So you got to lead. You have to lead from the front, and there's nothing wrong with that. You have to embrace it. It's wonderfully challenging. It's incredibly humbling. It's the most. I mean, think of this on a more general sense. We learn right at the edge. Think of a child learning how to walk. Basically, he's right on the edge of falling down, crawling, and walking. That's how you learn. Like how the next thing is they got to learn how to run, which is right on the edge of walking, right? So if you want to, the best place to learn is, I mean, that's how we're wired. I mean, think of how you learn to read. It's how our school systems are organized.
Yeah.
It's how you train people to become better. You learn right on the edge. So if, as a leader, if you want to push a group or an enterprise in the right direction, a sports team doesn't make any difference. You got to do it right on the edge. It's why sports teams, for example, they're always looking for the best competition because that's where they learn to get better, right on the edge. You know that nobody playing in the National Hockey League learns anything by playing their kids, right? The Montreal Canadiens are now playing all their sons and daughters. They're not going to get any better. Their sons and daughters might get better, but they certainly aren't. Yeah. And this is true for teams as well. I mean, if you take a really high performing team and you take out some of the best performing members of that team and you sub in some team members who are going to perform well below expectations, the whole team begins to sink down to that level. It doesn't, the people who are infused don't necessarily rise. So, and again, this is, I mean, it's a function of groups, but it's also a function of leadership. It's a function of trying to be right at this edge.
Yeah, yeah. And Bert, in your opinion, is leadership more about strategy or adaptability?
It's adaptability. Of course it's I mean, there's no doubt about it. So you have think about this in well, let's take any context. Let's say we'll take a military context. The very first thing, you all get together, you have this big plan, everything is okay, we're going to do this, and then you run into some very stiff opposition, which is what happens in the army. Like the other guys are actually opposed. And the plan goes out the window. It's in Sun Tzu's Art of War. The first casualty of any battle is the plan. So if you're going to survive, what do you need to do? You need to be adaptable, right? You cannot be married, as I mentioned earlier, to the outcome, right? You have to be embedded in the process. You divorce from the outcome, which is now the plan, and then embedded and married to what's happening right now. So you have to be adaptable. Of course, you have to have a plan. I mean, you have to have some direction that you want to go. That's part of leadership. Follow me. We're going this direction. And part of leadership also is like, okay, that ain't working. We need to do this, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's how you pivot. Yeah.
That's how you pivot. Yeah, exactly. That's a beautiful word, right? Think of that.
It is.
Right? Pivot means that you're not running away. It means that you're not necessarily heading off in the completely opposite direction. A pivot can be as little as like 5 degrees, right? 5 degrees. That's it. One analogy I like to use in terms of customer acquisition is, imagine you're standing on the railroad tracks, and coming at you is the customer train. It's a train full of your ideal customers. And what you want to do is stand on the tracks and get run over, right? You want that train to just completely level you. But you can move. You take a half a step left or right, and the train's going to go whizzing past you.
Yeah.
And all you get is a great big blast of hot air.
Yeah.
So the idea simply is that you're pivoting, right? If you just pivot the 5 degrees left or right, you get on or off the tracks. So it's a beautiful word. It's a wonderful way to look at leadership. It's the ability to pivot under pressure, right? When everything is telling you, man, I don't know this. We had this plan. We're all wired. Everything is going in the right direction, but I don't know. It just ain't right. So the pressure now starts mounting. And in a leadership position, if you're not prepared to bear up under the pressure, if that ain't, because there'll be people looking to you. It'll be tough. There's tough decisions to make. If you're at sea alone, it's life or death, literally, right? So you need to pivot.
Yeah.
Pivot
Yeah.
under pressure.
Great. Pivot under pressure. Here we go. Bert, let's talk about the state of our oceans. Spending so much time on the water, you've witnessed changes firsthand. What's your take on the states of our oceans?
Well, I'd say first and foremost that 80% of the commercial fishing, of 80% of the high seas commercial catch is illegal. That means they're either fishing illegally or they're fishing in areas that they're not supposed to fish. It's a massive problem.
That's a huge.
And the size of the industrial commercial fishing fleet would stagger the imagination. It's at a scale that most people can't possibly imagine or appreciate because they don't most people don't. It's very hard to relate to an offshore processing plant in the form of a ship that's bigger than the biggest cruise ship that you've ever seen, and that's at sea 365 days a year, and is attended by basically a cohort of ships that would put most navies to shame, and they're at sea all the time, and they vacuum up everything. It's why that the albatross population, for example, in the Southern Ocean is collapsing. It's why fish stocks at the bottom of the food chain have been collapsing. It's one of the reasons why that there's a collapse of fishing stocks here on the west coast of Canada, because most of the salmon, a good percentage of the salmon catch is illegal bycatch by offshore netting. So the scale of commercial fishing is an issue because we're fishing at a scale that's not sustainable. And a good example is sushi in the form of tuna. Like that was, I love sushi. I love tuna. I'm not eating it anymore because of what I've come to know about bluefin tuna and bluefin tuna stocks. I always assumed naively that people have been eating, certainly people in Asia had been eating bluefin tuna and sushi forever, but that's entirely untrue.
It's not true. Yeah,
it's not true at all.
No, it's not true.
And there isn't a place that you can't go here in North America that you can't find bluefin tuna at a sushi place. Almost all of that stuff being bluefin tuna comes from Prince Edward Island now. So a fish caught in Prince Edward Island is in Japan within 24 hours in a marketplace, is then sold and usually consumed within a very short period of time after that. So it's firstly, it's shockingly how good we are at doing that sort of thing. And more importantly, it's frightening at how good we are at doing that sort of thing. So the states of the ocean in terms of fish, I think ecologically, in terms of water quality, in terms of microplastics, in terms of acidification, all those things we have issues with. But by far and away, the bigger issue is industrialized commercial fishing, because it's firstly, it's not at a scale that's sustainable. It's unnecessary in the same way that whaling was unnecessary, just a few decades ago. And it's having devastating impacts on the entire food chain. Like firstly, you have to realize that the open ocean is a desert. There's nothing there. It's a desert in the sense that there's very few nutrients in the upper water column where the sunlight is, because nothing happens without sunlight. Because almost all the nutrients are carried into the ocean by runoff from the land. So it's all the littoral zones, which is the zones very close to the seashores and the continental shelves that are where all the most productive fisheries are, and the open oceans themselves tend to be deserts. So if you're out fishing the desert, then you have a problem. Like if you're actually vacuuming up whatever food sources are there, that's an issue. Which is where, for example, euphausiids are, where krill are, where the things that are feeding, like I said, albatross are. So, yeah, that would be if I had one thing that I'm genuinely concerned about. It's one thing I think that we can make we can have a very large impact on very, very quickly by coming to our senses about what we're doing in the oceans with regards to large-scale industrial fishing.
Yeah, but here is the issue. A couple of days ago, I think 2 days ago, I saw on the news called breaking a tuna that was caught, I don't know where, in Japan, and it's the first one in 2025, and it was sold for a couple of millions. And we are there advertising this kind of things, and then you think about, okay, uh, because of our humankind prosperity that that is driving all this, sorry to say, nonsense,
Hmm.
absolute nonsense. For our pleasure, it's crazy. Are governments and global policies doing enough to address this issue?
No, not at all. I mean, I talked about four P's, but the fifth one is policy.
Mm,
And as a sailor, you or an explorer, you simply don't have the luxury of poor policy. The policies that you go to sea with have to be commensurate with what's happening, have to be commensurate with what's going on immediately around you. I mean, you can't imagine. I mean, try to think for a moment. If your policy is that you're going to put up the largest sail possible and sail around the world as fast as possible, come hell or high water, it doesn't matter what the wind is or the waves are. That's your policy, and you're sticking to it.
mm,
It's absurd in its face, and that's how we make policy. We make policies that sound good, but then don't do good. So it sounds good, of course, if I'm going to sail around the world to go as fast as humanly possible. That just sounds good. It doesn't necessarily do any good as soon as I run into the real world, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
we politicians, bless their hearts, they they're in the business of sounding good because that's how they get reelected. That's how they get money. Uh, that's how they engage with people. But doing good is a completely different task. That's really hard. And we need to, I mean, that's our job, I think, as citizens. It's your job as a citizen scientist is to give data, to get data to scientists who make policies that don't necessarily sound good, but do good. So I think we have a moral responsibility to rail against poor policy. Commercial fishing, industrial commercial fishing at scale in the ocean,
Mm.
bad policy. Selling tuna on, in the fish market in Tokyo for $2 million or whatever it is to get, a very large tuna. That sounds good. It doesn't do any good anywhere
No,
at
it
all,
doesn't. No.
but it sounds good because oh my God, the fishermen are making money. That's good. The market, how excited is everyone? It all sound, but it's just horrible policy. I mean, think of the incentive structure that exists. Firstly, on the open market, on the black market. I mean, in any way that you slice it up, the incentive structure is just completely inverted to what actually should be doing good. I mean, don't forget that tuna, it's the big tuna that lay all the eggs. It's
Mm.
exponential. And so, I mean, it's how I can go on about the cod,
Yeah,
fishery collapsing. So
yeah.
this idea of policy is really, I'm actually glad that I'm really happy to actually talk about this with you because I mean, you know yourself how it's it's way harder to do good than it is to sound good if you're trying to put on, say, the Olympics, which is something that you know about, right? It's
Mm.
easy to sound good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like in Vancouver, we're gonna bring the Winter Games to Whistler. Everyone's, like two thumbs up. Sounds
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really hard to do
Yeah.
that well.
And
That
at what
has
cost?
and at what cost
And what
exactly? What
cost? Yeah.
cost?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that it's any time that you're listening to policy, you should have is this sounding good or is this doing good? That's the hat that you should be wearing, and that's the lens through which you should be looking at these things. And
Mm.
in terms of climate and sustainability, there's no end. There's no end to just horrible, horrible policy.
Yeah.
Horrible, and it's not always what you think. So, I mean, okay. Think about this. Think about this. Very, very briefly, not in terms of the context of oceans, but here in Canada, we have some of the largest natural gas reserves in the world. And countries like India are burning coal like crazy because they need cheap energy. Cheap energy is the way. It's the way that people can actually move away from abject poverty and into a space where they're not worried about what their next meal is going to be, but what the environment's going to look like after tomorrow, after I don't have to worry about what I'm going to eat. So there's a very direct correlation and causation between poverty and people concerned about their immediate environment. And the best way out of poverty is cheap energy. So if Canada's not selling its natural gas. So just for the sake of argument, I'm not saying do this, but I'm saying that in terms of policy. Let's say that Canada sold its natural gas to India, and India has come to Canada and said, we want natural gas because you guys have got lots and we can make a really good deal for it. You could replace all the coal-fired plants that are in India and replace something like 2.5 billion tons of CO2 because it's going to end up in the atmosphere anyway. And you may as well use a very clean burning fuel that doesn't have nearly the carbon footprint that coal does. And the same thing's happening in China. They're building, what were they building last year? A coal plant every week or something like that, because they need cheap energy to move their population out of abject poverty. So it's morally reprehensible to get on the green bandwagon at the express expense of economically disadvantaged populations around the world. And there's still almost 1 billion people living in abject poverty in the world. So you need to have policy that there's two sides to every coin, that not only sounds good but actually does good. So of course it would be, again, you could very easily, I'm just making an argument here, it's very easy to make an argument that says if we can do two things, remove a great swath of the population out of abject poverty into something whereby they don't have to worry about food. Literally, they don't have to worry about clean water. They don't have to worry about shelter because they've got access to clean energy. And at the same time, we can take out 2.5 billion tons of CO2 every year from being spewed into the atmosphere. That generally would, I think, you could make an argument that that's a good thing to do.
And Bert, what's your take in regards to the various pledges and promises of the West, for example, or let's say the UN climate conference, the COP that UN organizes every year in terms of net zero?
Well, I can speak from a Canadian perspective. So Canada has probably they've been one of the most vocal proponents of net zero, and they are probably one of the worst, certainly the worst of the G7 countries in actually meeting their climate goals. So they're saying one thing and doing something else. So why would they be doing that? Well, because it sounds good, right? Net zero we're going to be net zero. That New Zealand is another terrible example, but I'll speak Canadian. They'll get me started on New Zealand. So Canada's shown they just don't care. They'll say one thing and do something completely different. And one of the reasons they're doing that is because the international accords are almost, well, no one's paying any attention to them. And why is that? Well, if you look at the actual IPCC data, and I had the same PhD supervisor as Andrew Weaver, Dr. Andrew Weaver, former leader of the Green Party here in British Columbia, who is actually one of the Nobel laureate scientists on a number of the IPCC governmental studies. So, and I've read them, so I kind of know wherever I speak. And a tech guy, I've actually read the numbers. If the United States went to net zero today, if they stopped, if they shut their entire economy down today, the net temperature increase at the end of the century, at the end of the 21st century, if the U.S. went net zero today, would be 0.3 degrees Celsius, which is another way of saying that everything is already baked into the atmosphere. So all the temperature, all the warming that we're going to see by the end of the century is already in the atmosphere. So imagine you have a bathtub full of water, right? And the water's overflowing. You go, oh my God, the water's overflowing, so you turn off the tap. All the water's still in the bathtub. It's not flowing down the sides anymore, so you've stopped the flowing down the side prongs, but the water's still in the bathtub, so we still have the water in the bathtub. So why are countries like Canada not paying any attention to those to the Kyoto Accord, to the Paris Accords? It's because most of them know that the water's already in the bathtub. It's just lip service, at this point. So net zero is, of course. So again, in terms of policy, if you decide to destroy the economy to get to net zero, you haven't done any good whatsoever. All you've done is drive your own country into abject poverty, which again increases the need for cheap energy. So one of the largest causes of death in the third world is air pollution. Air pollution, and where's that caused? It's caused from burning very low quality fuels like wood and dung indoors. So if you want to do some good, why would you save, basic, what is it? I think it's in the order of 250 or 350,000 lives a year are lost just to inhaling pollutants that are a direct result of, cooking indoors on things like, literally dung and wood. So again, we're talking policy here. So I think that, and on a, I guess the 30,000-foot view is that humans have an unbelievable track record at adaptability. It's one of the things that we do incredibly well, more so than any other species. It's why, all of Holland can be below sea level. It's why all of the Mekong Delta can be below sea level. It's why Inuit can live in the Arctic, and they make everything out of, like, look what they have, and look at how they can live, love, and thrive in that environment. Yeah. It's how I marvel that the obsidian arrowhead that I've been, that I held in my hand, when there's no obsidian in anywhere within 1,000 miles of Estevan. But we've shown as well that we're horrible at mitigation. So any of our policies that are geared towards mitigation aren't leaning into our strengths. We need to lean into our ability to adapt. So our ability to, look at grain, look at corn yields, for example. Corn feeds a huge swath of the human population, and we've been able to massively increase corn yields through technology. So that's an adaptability problem, right? It's not a mitigation problem. It's an adaptability problem that we've been able to address and solve. Building dikes is it's an adaptability problem, as opposed to trying to, a mitigation approach might be to try to pump out the North Sea, right? That's not a good idea. You're way better at building, maybe raising the dike a bit. Yeah. So I think we have to address the carbon problem. Like, we have to address that in the atmosphere. We have to understand exactly what the anthropomorphic content to global to CO2 warming is. We have to have a very good idea of what that is, which means that we need data, which means that citizens can play a role in this. It also means that we need to engage with policies that don't just sound good, but actually do good. And that are focused on adaptability. So the reason I think that almost every country in the world has ignored net zero, because it's the bathtub is full of water problem, and most people realize that. But it sounds good to commit to net zero. I mentioned very briefly New Zealand, and I'm going to pull these numbers off the top of my head, so I might be wrong, but basically, New Zealand they decided that they would become net zero by the year 2050, and then they revised those figures down to be down to something like 2035, I believe. Mm-hmm. And in order for them to get to net zero, they would spend more money on that problem than they're currently spending on every other aspect of government. So their entire country, they would destroy economically their entire country to get to net zero.
To net zero, yeah.
So how does that net zero sounds good, but they can't possibly do it without huge economic in the way that they had described getting to net zero. They can't do that without literally destroying everything that they hold near and dear, including education, healthcare. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, like you said, it's a nice idea, but how on earth are you going to achieve it?
Yeah,
and for this reason, we spoke about this issue countless times on this medium, that the yearly COP is obsolete. And even what's fascinating, Bert, because every COP, you see there is this stress. The last day, they try to extend with a couple of hours and sometimes an extra day and things like that. And you ask yourself, and then the mainstream media, they're all featuring that thing, because there is that issue, we cannot get that nation to sign, we need to negotiate further. And then you ask yourself, hang on a second. Every year, there is the General Assembly in New York under the UN umbrella. Why they don't discuss the topic, or at least to agree on the main key points for the following COP, And when you go to the COP, you just ratify, approve, fine tune slightly that agreement, and then you get on with it. It's yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it's. Well, I mean, there's an element to that you alluded to, which is the mainstream media. So most of what people would know about climate change and CO2 impacts and all these things it's so the media does I think a conscious job of trying to keep you on the edge of being, oh my God, Chicken Little, the sky is falling, because that tends to get people's attention. It's like slowing down to see a car wreck. Everybody, when there's an accident on the highway, everybody slows down.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. So I think that there's a role that they're playing that's been just nefarious.
Look, Bert, this issue, it is clear that it is being politicized. Sustainability, it's a topic that the politicians, the decision makers, made it complicated to understand. And what everyone cares about, including the communities or including the folks that believe that climate change is it's a hoax, what everyone wants, it's clean air, clean water, and clean soil. And then looking after whatever is left on this earth, and try to conserve, try to consume less. And it's and these pledges, we go back to the pledges, we go back to the policies, we go back to the regulations. It's like we're going around circles.
You're right. We're going around I think you're going around in circles because it's been very political, and it's very politically expedient to polarize your audience. This works for business as well. It's every bit as important to know who your audience is as to know who your audience isn't. Because the people who aren't going to engage with you for, commercially for whatever reason, they just don't, your message is not for them. The sooner you find out who those people are and you divorce yourself from that group, the more attention you can put on this other group. So this idea of polarization, we see it everywhere. And it's politically very expedient to polarize your audience so that you can speak in the echo chamber. That's, like social media.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we get this incredibly polarizing news all the time, and it's about everything. It's about the climate. It's about it's like look at the reference to the tuna you just made. That's incredibly polarizing because there's people who go, okay, that's just wrong in every way that they can imagine, and there's people who go, look at that, isn't that amazing? I want to go and I want to go grab myself a $1 million tuna.
Yeah.
So it's a very and because the topic has been politicized and polarized, it's very difficult to talk to the other side, right? Because you're immediately labeled as a hoaxer. What do you know? What do you care? How is it impacting you? You can't even speak to this issue. So, but for example, go ahead.
Yeah,
please.
go ahead.
So you mentioned clean water, and a lot of my travel in Canada is in places that are very remote, and the only population that's there, 24/7, 365 is Indigenous. And there's a real problem in Canada, despite the fact that we have some of the largest probably the largest freshwater reserve in the world, if you don't, perhaps as big as Russia, or maybe as big as Russia. We can't get clean water to where most of these Indigenous people live. Like, it's shocking.
And why
right?
that?
Oh, the government is not incentivized to get clean water to these people because there's no votes there, right? There's no real reason to do it. There's no monetary or political incentive to do it, and yet they're just literally clamoring for we need clean water. Although you can drink water out of the lakes and rivers, that's fine. That's not necessarily clean because you can still get, there's all kinds of things that can make you sick there. But the point is that they don't have the same access to water that you and I would have.
Yeah.
And it's shocking given how much of that resource we have and how simple a problem it is.
Because it became a kind of a luxury thing or a commodity. And which it should be clean water, clean air, clean soil should be a human right. Simple, period. Yesterday I heard the speech of Justin Trudeau. I don't want to talk politics. I heard him talking in French and in English about the environment, sustainability. And the first thing that crossed my mind said, okay, what have you done as a
Yes.
decision maker? Like stupid question. I ask myself that straightforward question. You
Yes.
have the key to take decisions. You, the parliament, whatever. What have you done since he was elected when? 2015 or?
2015. Yeah, it's 9 years. Yeah.
What have you done, seriously, in terms of making the lives of the Canadians better, in terms of having this clean water, clean air, and clean soil?
Yeah, again, not to get political, but if you look at those questions objectively, Canada is worse off in every single one of those measures, in every single measure. And I think that's, like you said, that speaks directly to the people who are in charge, and it speaks directly to the messaging, which is, what have you done? If you like, and I said what my dad would say, if things are going south, you don't fire the janitor, because it's not him making the decisions.
No.
So what have you done? And that's a very legitimate question to ask Canadians. And it's one of the things that I'm deeply, as much as I love Canada and I'm a proud Canadian, I'm deeply embarrassed by the manner in which we've held up the promises that we've made as a country to the global community about how we are going to move forward, not just in Canada, but how we as Canadians go out in the world and tell people what they should be doing. You should be doing this, you should be doing that. I think we've been an embarrassment on that front, because we haven't made our own bed. Like I'd mentioned, Indigenous people struggling to get clean water here, the problems that farmers are having, just in terms of ensuring that they're engaged in sustainable practices that are capable of feeding not just our population, but a good chunk of the world's, a section or chunk of the world's population. How we've dealt with the abundance of natural resources we have in terms of fisheries. It's just been a shocking. I think we've been a shocking example on the world stage. So, yeah.
Okay, let's go back and talk about your achievements. Let's be positive here.
Yeah.
So, through all what you achieved, basically the circumnavigation, what was the most challenging part of those journeys?
Well, I think people would automatically people are typically drawn to the fact that you do them alone. And I get the question, are you lonely? And I would say no, because there's a world of difference between being lonely and alone. You can be alone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're lonely. So what shocked me certainly about the paddle was the mental stress of every day you have to push as hard as you possibly can every single day, and that wears on you.
And on that, how do you mentally process the scale of such achievements?
Well, the way that I do it is, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier when I said that, you, instead of thinking about sailing around the world, I'm thinking about sailing to the next point. So whenever I'm faced with a task that seems overwhelming, I just keep breaking it down. I just keep we have this voice inside our head that says, it's too far, it's too hard, you're too old, you can't do it, you don't have enough money, there's not enough food. There's 1,001 reasons. This voice inside your head it works there 24/7. And its full-time job is to say no. Its full-time job is to tell you that you can't. And it has almost an infinite number of excuses ready to go. So what I've done and what I do is, that voice is never going away. It's part of it. It's in you in the same way that there's a divine spark, I think, in all of us. Again, it's the other side of the coin. So there's part of you that says you can, and there's part of you that says you can't. But usually the can't voice for all of us, it's just, it's the imposter syndrome. Yeah. It's why Leonardo da Vinci went to his deathbed saying that he had let down all of mankind because his works had not met the standards that he felt God's gifts had demanded of him. And Dirac, Paul J. Dirac, probably one of the brightest, smartest physicists ever to live. He had the same. His deathbed was the same. His exclamations on his deathbed. So that part of you is never going away. So it is, however, thankfully, very stupid. It's not very smart. So you can trick it. And the way that I trick it, so the way that I trick it is I keep breaking the task down smaller and smaller and smaller until that voice inside your head can no longer differentiate between you doing and not doing whatever that thing is. And the voice just gives up because it's stupid, not smart. And it goes, oh, what's the difference? Go ahead. I don't care. Yeah. So imagine the example might be, say you want to get fit, but you're lying on the couch watching Netflix. Guy, I need to go to the gym. And the voice says, forget that. It's too far. It's too cold. You got to start the car. You're hungry. Get something to eat. This is a really good show. But then you keep breaking the task of getting down to the gym to sitting up. Because the first thing you got to do if you're lying on the couch watching Netflix is sit up. So you go, I can sit up. Yeah. And the voice inside your head goes, well, there's no difference. You can watch the movie sitting up or lying down. I don't care. And it stops talking to you. Yeah. Then you sit up. And the next thing is to stand up. And the voice is, again, not smart enough to differentiate between watching a movie standing up and sitting down. And that's what you do. Then you walk to the door. Now, it sounds incredibly crazy, but I use exactly that same strategy in the middle of the worst storms in the Southern Ocean, because I'm lying down in my bunk, in my berth with a seatbelt, literally as hard as I can nail it down so I don't get thrown around the cabin because the motion is crazy. And I'm thinking to myself, if I get up, I got to go outside because I know that I got to do something. I know that, but that's like walking to the moon. I can't even think of getting out, but I can think of sitting up and getting the seatbelt off so I can at least, brace myself, because it would take me an hour to get dressed to go outside. That's how violent the motion on the boat is. And just even getting dressed is a hazard because you get, thrown across the boat, one side to the other. Yeah, it's like then you got to get outside like a washing machine. Then then you have to get outside and risk life and limb, because the boat is mostly underwater. But I would just simply reduce the task to sitting up. And then I'd reduce the task to walking to the head where I could, have 4 points of contact. It would take me 20 minutes to get my boots on. So if I would simply reduce the task to the point where the voice inside your head just gave up. It couldn't differentiate between those two things. So that's how I face. Imagine you're climbing Everest. It's just a walk. There's only a couple of technical sections. Two. There's the Kumbu Icefall, and then there's the Hillary Step, and both of them are they're roped. So it's not mountaineering in any way that you and I might know mountaineering. It's just a walk. Yeah. But you just have to tell yourself to take the next step. The next step might be excruciatingly difficult, but it's just one step. And if you take enough steps, you get to the top. Full stop. End of story.
Mm-hmm. When you look back, Bert, how have these experiences changed your outlook on life and humanity?
Well, I think it's certainly helped me to get... Well, firstly, let me give you a big answer here. You cannot do the things that I've done without your idea of... We live in a very cynical world. I mean, the news is typically very cynical. It's very polarized. It's all very negative. You very rarely hear stories that would warm your heart, except maybe Christmas. The rest of the time it's, oh, whoa. But I mean, every hardship I've ever endured in anything I've ever undertaken, from being in a trench in Germany, staring across at my Russian counterpart, to sailing into the, above the Arctic Circle, to going around the world, the people that you meet along the way make every hardship melt away. It gets blown away by so much dust because the people you meet are so amazing. And the people that end up being part of your life, whether it's big or small, that's just an unbelievable and unforgettable privilege. So you simply cannot be cynical about humanity if you've been exposed to it in the way that I have been. And I've been exposed to it in a way where I'm sort of literally landing on someone's doorstep as a washed up guy who's just paddled 4,000 kilometers, bedraggled, starving, cold, hungry, and I have every red flag that you could possibly have that says, lock the doors and hide. Here's a crazy person. And everybody that I've ever come across cannot do enough for you. And you're a stranger to them. You'll never see them again. They'll never see you again. And yet they have their hearts, their homes, are just completely opened wide to you. So there's that element of humanity that exists everywhere I've been in every circumstance. So I cannot possibly be cynical about humanity, despite all the things that you might see across your landscape, whether that's looking outside in a large city or the news or social media, because there's part of humanity that part has not gone away. And more personally, it's helped me realize what I actually can control, which is a very, very important. It's very simple, and this is advice that everyone gives. Oh, you have to live in the moment. It's like, okay, well, what exactly is that? What does that look like? How do you get there? What does it take to get there? Like, it's almost impossible because we all carry around, one of these things that keeps us attached to the world 24/7. But when you realize how much you actually don't control and what you actually can control, it is firstly, it's unbelievably freeing. And secondly, and more importantly, it's unbelievably empowering, because you can then move forward in every context, in every way, in every shape and form in your life, in the most powerful way, in the way that you have the most impact, in the way that's most beneficial, not just to you, but to your immediate family, to those that you love, to your community, to basically everything that we can possibly reach and touch. And in this day and age, the things that we can reach and touch are vastly expanded. So, and I'm not saying that's a reason to do it, but I'm saying that's one more reason that you should be at least oriented in that direction, because now I think you can have a very clear understanding of the good that you can do and the bad that you can do. So, like my brother would say, because I'm a horrible cook, I grew up in the army, can't cook anything. He said to me once, it takes just as long to make a really bad meal, Bert, as it does to make a really good meal. Because he's a really good cook, and he would spend the same amount of time making this, making what I thought was the same thing, but what clearly isn't. So It takes just as much effort to make a really good meal as it does to make a really bad one. Yeah. So choose.
Great. Now it's time for our lightning round.
Okay.
You ready for speedy Q&A?
Yeah, speedy Q&A. Got it.
Let's do it. What's your favorite sailing destination and why?
Favorite sailing destination is a small fjord on the Alaskan Panhandle. It's Agrippina. For one, it's shockingly beautiful. It's shockingly rugged. It's rugged in a way that's primeval. And there's every kind of, there's caribou, there's moose, there's deer, there's Kodiak brown bear, there's killer whales, there's every sort of all the mega fauna that you could possibly hope and not hope to run into in that place. But it's shockingly beautiful.
Stunning. Yeah. Fantastic. One book or a movie that's inspired you recently?
Well, I won't say. Well, recently because I'm stuck between. There's one book I say everyone has to read, and it's Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that will tell you that there's not really anything new under the sun when it comes to leadership, when it comes to community involvement, when it comes to how to be a responsible and how to be a responsible citizen and a worthy member of your community and society. But most recently, I think that the best book I've read is Jordan Peterson's We Who Wrestle with God.
Good. Bert, if you could have a dinner with a historical figure, who would it be and why?
I would have dinner with Dirac. Because he was the person. He's the scientist, and I'm a formal math sort of IT tech guy. He's the guy who first married quantum physics and relativistic physics. So he saw the world in a way, in a top-down way that no one was able to see it. Not even Einstein for all his brilliance, because Einstein was able to describe the universe in cosmic scales, in vast universal scales. And Dirac, he was involved with the universe on quantum scales, but he had a vision that united the two. So I think he would be an interesting guy, and he was very introverted. So he was. There's not too much known about him other than his scientific exploits, but I think he'd be a really interesting guy to talk to because his universal worldview was as encompassing as anyone's I could possibly imagine.
Yeah. The one gadget or tool you can't live without.
A can opener.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Okay. What is the best piece of advice you ever received?
The best piece of advice I ever got was from my dad, and he said, "I thought you were smarter than that."
Wow.
Sadly, it came very late in life.
And what is the worst career advice you ever gotten?
The worst career advice. Oh man, I'm struggling with that. Okay, the worst career advice I ever got was "You got this." The little phrase that says "You got this." Yeah, you got this. Yeah.
If not an adventurer, what would you be doing?
Oh, as if I weren't an adventurer, I'd be a prof. I'd be a professor at a university.
Okay.
But I would be stuck talking about things. It's hubris to think that I would be a professor, because that would imply that I think I'm smart enough to be one. I'm not sure that's true, but I would end up just talking about stuff, as opposed to doing. Right? Adventure is doing.
Yeah. Your perfect day off, what does it look like?
Oh, my perfect day off is just sailing. And going nowhere, like as opposed to in some giant expedition mission thing. I would just be sailing because it's the one place where my mind turns off on a sailboat.
Yeah, I agree with you. What's a surprising fact about you?
I'm a former U.S. heavyweight Taekwondo champion.
Here we go. Fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic. One thing on your bucket list you've yet to achieve.
I want to walk down. I want to go to Turkey, and I want to walk through the town of Ephesus.
Okay.
So visit the old world, where most of Western civilization sprang from.
Yeah. And lastly, one piece of advice or wisdom to our listeners on any topic.
Read. We read voraciously. Never stop reading. And don't ever say if there's a book or something that piques your interest for whatever reason, then read it. It'll pay you back in ways that you cannot possibly imagine. And it may not be immediate, of course, but it will be. I guarantee you that anything you read will be transformative in ways that will move your life forward in ways that you cannot imagine, and that will make you not just a better person, a better father, a better mother, a better husband, a better son. There isn't any aspect of your life that reading isn't going to make better.
Fantastic. Bert, thank you for sharing your story with us.
Well, I was, like I said at the very beginning, I was really looking forward to talking to you, and I think I'm still just smiling because it's been so fun, and we've been able to we're just going everywhere, which is I mean, how we ever ended up talking about all these crazy things from bluefin tuna to soil samples. It's been just a wonderful, beautiful conversation. I can't thank you enough.
Great. And before we wrap up, can you tell our listeners where they can contact you, learn more about your work, or connect with you online?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just type in my name, or you can just go to BertTerHart.com, and from there you can spread out to my adventure type activities, or you can go to my professional activities, or to anything in between.
Mm-hmm. Great. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend who could use a dose of inspiration. Let's leave you with a quote from Eric Tabarly, a legendary French sailor and pioneer in offshore racing, whose innovations in yacht design and reverence for the sea continue to inspire sailors worldwide. To understand the sea, you must live with it, not conquer it. Until next time, keep exploring, innovating, and making an impact.